As the teacher, I am bearing witness to these things, just as Mark was bearing witness that these things happened. Welcome to Teach Through the Word, the podcast for Bible teachers. Chris Langham with you again for episode 2. Back with me here is Peyton Jones. Peyton, how you doing?
I'm doing awesome. And I feel like with the energy, I feel like I should be Kermit the Frog going, yay, when you announce that we're back.
You
Like
gotta
it's the
shake your
Bible
arms
Teacher Muppet Show.
wildly like a good Kermit. All right, back in the producer's chair is Jonathan Ferguson. Jonathan, how you doing in there?
I can flail. Look, see, like that, right? That's what you're
Yes,
looking for.
you can.
I'm doing good.
You have to be. You got to be able to open your mouth literally bigger than your entire face and then shake all around. That is a Kermit excitement for the show.
Well, yeah.
All right,
that's
time to
all
put
I
on
can do.
makeup. It's time to hit the lights. It's time to get things started. It's episode 2
Why don't we
tonight.
get things started?
We didn't even plan that. I love the Muppet Show. That was fantastic. All right, guys, it is episode 2. We are going to dig into the book of Mark, and today we're going to look at the context of Mark and how that influences how you teach through the book, and we'll get a little behind the scenes at how I dug into the book of Mark for the Through the Word series. We are here to equip you, Bible teachers, to do what you do better, and together with you to elevate the craft of Bible teaching. I love the craft of Bible teaching. I don't know if I shared that with you, Peyton, but I love this.
Well, and it shows, brothers. So the first question we're going to ask is, here's budding, aspiring teachers coming to this podcast, and they're thinking, okay, there are 66 books in the Bible. Why should I teach the Gospel of Mark?
That's a good question. Well, and that's actually 2 questions. One is just teaching through a book of the Bible. I want to encourage every Bible teacher to try teaching through a book of the Bible. I know for some churches, some traditions, that's not the style you normally use, but wow, is it powerful for me to teach your way through a book of the Bible. If you're going to do that, then selecting which book of the Bible to teach is an important question. It should be a Holy Spirit-led answer, but it should also match up what I call the big 4 questions. The big 4 questions should all be in line in order for you to decide to teach this book. Those questions are, first, why did the author write it? In this case, why did Mark write his gospel? Second question, why did God include this book in the Bible? Those 2 are should be definitive and firm from the Bible, but the second 2 are from you. Question 3, why do you want to teach it? What is it that's stirring in your heart that makes you think, I kind of want to teach through the book of Mark? And fourth, why do your people need to know it? Why do they need to hear it? If you can line up all 4 of those questions together, I think the Holy Spirit is prompting you to teach. And we can answer the first 2 for you. We can help you with that for the book of Mark. Why did the author write it? Well, Mark was recording a testimony of Jesus' life. He was recording the story of Jesus, and Mark's perspective may have been the first one recorded. Really what Mark was doing was gathering eyewitness accounts in order to create a written recording of Jesus' story. And if you look at his perspective in particular, he was presenting Jesus really from the human perspective. He was recording the life of Jesus as the Son of Man, seeing Jesus as human, but as Jesus walked as human, see him serving others. Jesus, the servant, is really the heartbeat of Mark's gospel. Why did God include it in the Bible? Well, this is the testimony of Jesus. Of course, he included it in the Bible. He included 4 testimonies of Jesus, 4 gospels, because God wanted to record this testimony, make it definitive. So we have 4 viewpoints of Jesus' life. I think a gospel should be taught as a regular rotation from any pulpit. And I really believe in teaching the gospels, but not getting every nook and cranny of each gospel. But each time you go through a gospel, taking some focus points from that gospel, and then maybe a couple of years later, picking another gospel and going through that one. So those are the big 4 questions. What else you got for me?
Well, it's pretty cool because exactly what you said is why, the church that you and I pastored together, Refuge Long Beach, that's why when we planted that church, we kicked off with the Gospel of Mark so people could encounter him. But I know it's a little tricky for those that have taught maybe like a few verses here and there, like maybe they taught a Psalms, or they've gotten, taught some of their favorite passages in an epistle, and then they come to a gospel. And it's a different thing, as we all know, when you go from teaching your favorite verses to coming to a book every week, and particularly a gospel. How do you teach a gospel, and why is it different from other books?
That's good. I'm a big believer in teaching in the genre of the book. And that's actually a philosophy I kind of developed over time and really kind of finally solidified just a few years ago, that my teaching style should be modified to match the text itself. And there's power in that. And one of the things it does, it releases the text to speak its message. So when I'm teaching through a narrative, which a gospel is a narrative, it's a story. So I am storyteller, and I really put myself into the mode of being a storyteller. Well, the gospels though are a particular type of narrative, and that is they're a testimony. Whereas you get narratives in Genesis and Exodus, those narratives are more historical narratives. This is a testimonial narrative. And so as I'm teaching it, since it's a testimony, I am bearing witness. As the teacher, I am bearing witness to these things, just as Mark was bearing witness that these things happened. He's really bearing witness mostly for Peter's testimony, but Mark would have known all the apostles. He was a young man at the time. And Mark is bearing witness for the testimonies of the apostles who shared these things, and the leaders and the women. And he's bearing witness to the stories that were told. He probably talked to some of the people involved. He may have talked to the demoniac. He may have talked to the dad who needed healing for his son. He's bearing witness to these stories. So as I'm teaching, I'm bearing witness. And that really gives a lot more power to your teaching, to teach through that perspective. And it changes the way that I come at it. So as you listen through the Through the Word series, I'm stepping in as a storyteller to tell you these stories, but I also get into the text and I witness them. And I look at them and I invite the reader to come with me and watch how Jesus does here. And you'll hear me use that phrase sometimes. Watch how Jesus responds to this. It's sort of like we're in a 3D simulation of the story, and we're looking in. Now we're really looking at the text. I'm pointing them back to the text, but I'm saying, take a look at what Jesus does. Watch this. Watch what Jesus says right here. And then I share what he says. And that's the dynamic that I want to create.
I love that. I love that idea of kind of taking them through. You're already teaching them in a sense how to be teachers of the word, just by the way that you're guiding them through it. You're teaching them how to study it on their own. What is
Right.
I know that you love to tell a good story. You've often said, as a teacher, I feel I'm primarily a storyteller. How do you tell a good story when you're teaching through a gospel like Mark?
Well, there's a lot of ways to tell a story badly. You can tell a story badly by giving away the ending. The Bible, I hate when the Bible writers, not the Bible itself, but the little headers give away the ending. Like it'll say David slays Goliath. Like, you just gave away the whole thing. Or like you'll read through the crucifixion story, and the next header says Jesus is raised, or the resurrection. Like, I knew it was coming, but that's not a good reason to kill it. You don't just. So as you tell a story, you keep the tension of the text. One of the absolute keys to good storytelling is maintaining tension. If you watch a movie that can hold your attention for 3 hours, they are holding tension. They're maintaining tension, and they're doing it with the soundtrack. You listen to the soundtrack, it builds and rises and creates more tension, and then it falls. And it does that with the storyline, and the storyline keeps shifting perspective. The story shifts perspective from here to there. It zooms out and zooms back in. All of that is part of good storytelling. If you're going to tell a story well in the Bible, don't give away the ending. Walk into it and find perspective. Notice what the text focuses on and ask questions about it. Reflect on it with the text, but let it keep moving. Sometimes you'll hear me ask a question. If you notice at the end of Mark, when Jesus is with the disciples entering into Jerusalem and he curses the fig tree, I don't say, well, here's why he cursed the fig tree. Here's the lesson of the story. I observe, did Jesus just curse a fig tree? Yes. Yes, he did. What is he doing? I ask those questions. I give a little lead into it. And I decided I'm not going to give away the whole thing. I give a little lead in and I say, well, here's what fig tree could mean to give you some hints. Fig tree relates back to Israel. I give a couple Old Testament references. And here's what fruit is about. But then I say, well, what does all that mean? I say, well, hold on. Jesus is on the move and we got to follow. I picked that phrase on purpose because I want you to enter the story and I don't want to give away the answer yet. Jesus didn't give away the answer yet. He waited until later to explain anything to the disciples. So I keep that
Yeah.
motion. I keep that motion of the text by saying Jesus is on the move. Let's follow him.
That's so good. And, you know, years ago, I was the evangelist over at Martin Lloyd-Jones's church, and people would talk about when they heard him 30, 40, 50 years earlier, and they could still remember the text. They could still remember things he said, his points. And I think that's one of the hallmarks of a great teacher is you're not just hearing a sermon. This is what I hear you saying right now. You're talking about teaching as if you're bringing the listener through an experience, right? Like you, just like Mark is the gospel writer, he wants them to experience Jesus. One of the things I think makes you such a great teacher is you are bringing them more than a sermon. You're bringing them into the experience with the same spirit and heart that Mark does. But I want to talk about the audience a little bit. How do you help your audience relate to the original audience? So we're talking about your intent as the author of the sermon or the teaching, just like the author of the book. You're matching that heart. How do we match the audience? How are you careful to help relate the audience you're preaching to the audience that originally saw and heard these things?
Yeah, that question is so good. And what that does when you connect them with the audience, it gives them the perspective, the original eyes, the original ears that heard this letter and connects them with it. And you get to see more of the message. You want your audience to hear the author's voice and you want them to connect with the audience's perspective. Then they'll get the fullness of that message. So first of all, you have to do that as the teacher. You have to put yourself into that perspective. So in this case, we have the author is Mark. Mark was not one of the original apostles. He's a little kid at that time, but he's grown up under the apostles. So you put yourself into Mark's shoes. He's grown up with us. Now he's a little bit older and he's reflecting back on this story that he saw glimpses of, but that he heard. He sat when Peter was speaking this, and he walked on the roads with Peter. He got his sandals dusted and he walked with Peter. And now Mark is an older man and he's writing this story to record it, but he's thinking about who he's sending it to. Who's he sending it to? They are Gentiles. It's very clear from the text that those are Gentiles who, because he explains Jewish things to make it clear, to make them clear. And so the Gentiles in the audience are people who wouldn't have the full biblical background. Well, you tell that to your audience, you tell them who they are, and you help them relate a little bit. Okay, so these are some people reading it back in Mark's time who wouldn't know all the religious stuff. They wouldn't know the Old Testament. They wouldn't know the references. And maybe that's like you. Maybe you walk into church feeling like this is going to go over my head. I don't know what's going on here. And you say, well, don't worry. Mark's going to break it down for you because that's who he was writing to. And if you're like that, if you walk into church, okay, I'm interested in this God stuff. I'm curious about this Jesus, but I just don't know where to start. Then you do exactly what Mark did. And you tell them, all right, you sit down right there with Mark's audience and Mark is going to lead you on a story. And as Jesus says, come follow me, you hear Jesus' voice and you just come along for the journey. And so I work things into the message where I say, hey, if you don't know what to think of this Jesus stuff, that's okay. We're just going to follow along because that's exactly what Mark did. Mark didn't challenge you about who Jesus is until halfway through his book. And Mark chapter 8, when Jesus did.
We're going to talk more about that in our next episode, really dig down into Mark chapter 8, because that's the fulcrum of the book. And I never saw that till you pointed it out. But we want to thank you again, Kris, for letting us pick your brain today and for helping us become world builders as preachers, kind of like George Lucas or Jim Henson, who created the Muppet Show for us. So I want to thank you today for teach that little skill as teachers.
Amen. That's it. All right. Thanks, Peyton. Thanks, Jonathan, for working the booth. Guys, each week at Teach Through the Word, we're going to bring you one Bible book or one teaching essential or one guest teacher to interview as we equip you, Bible teacher, to do what you do better, and together with you to elevate the craft of Bible teaching. Thanks for joining us. We will see you in episode 3.